Hey everyone, you guys know what it is. It is time for the last sew along as part of my hashtag business wardrobe series. Now, back in March, I said that I was going to take 4 patterns and do a complete sew along for 4 different patterns and show you how you build your own wardrobe. And I've been doing that. This is the last one using Butterick 6718. So there's 2 videos. The first part is doing the jacket and the pants, and then the second video will be the top, the skirt, and the dress. Now, if that's some content you would like to see, keep on watching. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video, we are doing a sew along for the top, the skirt, and the dress. All right, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. And if you are new here, welcome. All right, I hope you like what you see and can subscribe for more. If you are returning, you know what to do. Grab you some coffee, some tea, some water, or whatever else you want to drink. All right, and sew along with me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this sew along. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the sew along for the skirt, which is view D. Now, once again, the pattern that I am using is Butterick 6718. Now, this is a beginner project. However, I will not be walking you through exactly on how to cut out the fabric or any of that stuff, because this is a pattern where it's only one pattern piece as shown in the instructions. Okay, so you need to cut out pattern piece number 10, which is the skirt front and the skirt back. Also take note of the cutting layout, what it means with the right side of the fabric, wrong side of the pattern, right side of the fabric, right side of the pattern, and the wrong side of fabric. All right, so you need to make note of the fabric cutting layout. Also, I will not be using lining for my skirt because there's no need to. But if you look at skirt D, I am using 45-inch fabric. Just make note that it wants you to cut your skirt. If you follow along with these instructions and not make the modifications that I am making, you need to have the right side of your fabric facing up on the table. That's what this portion is right here. This is right side of fabric. You need to cut one, not on the fold, you need to cut one of pattern piece number 10, which can be your skirt front or your skirt back. You need to cut one with the right side of the fabric facing up. That's what this one is. This is right side of fabric, right side of pattern, I'm sorry. And then this one with the dotted shaded area is the wrong side of your pattern piece. You need to have one with the right side of the pattern piece facing up, and then one with the wrong side of the pattern piece facing down. All right, facing up, I'm sorry. All right. So that is the cutting layout for that. Now I am doing a couple of hacks, so I'm gonna move these instructions out of the way. I will not be following along with the instruction for the modifications that I am making, but you will get essentially the same skirt for what I'm doing. All right, so I'm moving these instructions out of the way, and now I'm gonna show you what I did for my skirt. Now, you will need pattern piece number 10, but I am adding pockets and a waistband. So first, let's talk about pattern piece number 10, what I did. Now, I cut the size 18 for my pattern. I also want to add a zipper to the back instead of to the side. So I'm gonna tell you the modification that I did for that. Now, for pattern piece number 10, you have a pattern that looks essentially something like this. I'm gonna move everything off to the side so you are able to see this very good in the camera. So you have a pattern that looks like this, just minus where I have added the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for the zipper placement. So I'm gonna lay this out for you so you can see this. So let's just ignore the fact that you see 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's what SA stand for zipper placement, all right? But if you mark both of these together, you will notice that this is one whole pattern, right? So what I did was I sliced up that line that says center front and center back, which is right here. Let me move it down a little bit so you can see. Right here, center front and center back, I sliced up that line, added 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to both sides. So this side right here, as well as this side right here. The reason why is because a zipper will be on both sides, okay? On this, in order to attach them together, all right? So essentially what I did was move the zipper from the side to the back, which means now the side where we have these notches, that has to be cut on the fold, okay? So these are cut on the fold instead of cutting it on the side, okay? So you would need to cut one on the fold of fabric for this piece and one on the fold of fabric for this piece, all right? Also, you have a center back, and I'm also adding pockets to one side, all right? So enough about all of that. That's exactly what I did. I also draft my own pockets. So what I did was I took the side where the pocket's going to go, and all I did was I measured from the top down about 8 1/4 or 8 1/4 inch all the way down. After I marked that, it's hard to see because I need white paper underneath. I'm hoping you're able to see that a little bit, kind of. And then I just kind of freehand a pocket. Basically put my hand there and just kind of freehanded a little bit, making sure that I had more than enough room for my hand to go in that pocket. So that's what the pocket looks like right here after I freehanded, okay? Basically, you just trace out with a tracing wheel how you want your pocket to look, and this is what I got, all right? Now, the last thing that I did after cutting out the, you know, basically adding the zipper to the back instead of the side, adding pockets, and I went ahead and drafted a waistband. Now, for the waistband, I'm gonna move this out the way. Now, for the waistband, I cut my waistband on the fold to save paper. That's the only reason why I cut it on the fold, okay? Now, if you are cutting yours on the fold like I did, you need to take your waist measurement plus a 1/2 inch and then divide by 2. So what that looks like is my waist measurement is 33 inches, add a 1/2 inch, which is 0.5, and then divide it by 2. And that gives me 16.75. So across is 16.75 by 2 inches high. I closed out my box, made my fold line on one end, and then added seam allowance of a 1/2 inch all the way around. That's what you need to do for your waistband. Now remind you, you will be cutting 2 on the fold of fabric if you did exactly what I did and did half the measurement to cut it on the fold instead of the entire waist measurement. Now, if you do not want to cut it on the fold and you just want to cut your entire waist measurement, what you need to do is take your waist, which is 33, plus that 1/2 inch, which is 33 1/2, right? So you need to make a measurement all the way across of 33 1/2, 2 inches high, and then add seam allowance all the way around, and you would still cut 2, but just not on the fold of fabric, all right? So that's what you need to do for yours for the waistband. Now that we talked about that, let's go ahead and get sewing let's go ahead and get started with the sewing of our skirt. All right, so the first thing you need to do is grab one of your skirt pieces. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is mark which one you want for your front and which one you want for your back. So I marked front on the portion that I want as my front, so I wrote front right here, but I hope you can see it. So I'm just gonna put a big F right here, which signifies the front, and then on my other pattern piece, I'm gonna write a B for the back. Now what you need to do is go ahead and open it out, and what we're gonna do, the first thing we're going to do, we're gonna do the exact same thing to the back as well. We're going to go ahead and do our pockets. So go ahead and grab 2 pocket pattern pieces, and then the other 2 will be used as your pocket pattern pieces for your back pattern, okay? So with right sides together, you're just going to go ahead and pin your pockets to both sides of your pattern. All right, so just make sure that you do that, all right? So what we're gonna do is go ahead and grab you some pins, and we're just going to go ahead and pin our pockets to the side. So go ahead and pin your pockets to both sides now. Alright, so now that I have my pockets pinned to both sides using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew both of your pockets together, and then go ahead and serge your side seams. So go ahead and do that, and then on your back pattern piece you should be doing the same thing, and just make sure that your back pattern piece is not cut on the fold. All right, so I said cut both on the fold, but your back pattern piece should not be cut on the fold. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the front done and I have the pockets, I went ahead and sewn on the pockets. I pressed the seam allowance towards the pockets, and then I went ahead and understitched the pockets. So you guys have seen me do this so many times on different skirts, so I'm not gonna walk you through that. So go ahead and move the front pattern piece out of the way. Grab your back pattern piece. Now, on the back pattern piece, you shouldn't have cut it on the fold, so I went ahead and just sliced up the fold because I did cut mine on the fold, not intentional. So you should have two pattern pieces, and what I want to show you here is I already added my pocket pattern piece to the portion that will not be the zipper. So there's the zipper, so I'm going to show you what it should look like when I sew it up. So if you lay it out, it should look like this, because once my zipper is in, then you will notice that the back will sew up very nicely and everything match up. Okay, so that's how I'm doing mine. So the zipper will be right here, and then I have two pockets on the side. All right, now make sure with right sides together you pin your pockets exactly like you did for the front. Sew using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then finish off your seam allowance for your pocket. Okay, now I finished mine all the way down to the notch there with my serger, and I went ahead and pressed the pockets to the seam allowance to the pocket. Now do not understitch on the back pocket pattern pieces. You don't need to do that for the pocket pattern piece. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is with right sides together. This is the center back where your zipper will be. Okay, you want to pin those together, right sides together, and you want to pin from that notch if you have one. If you did not make one, you can use whatever length zipper that you want. I think mine is 9 inches, so just make sure that you use either 7-inch, 9-inch, 12-inch, whatever you want to do, whatever suits your fancy. So I'm just going to grab some pins, and I'm going to pin at the top, then pin at the notch, and pin all the way down my zipper. Now, one thing that I'm going to do before I sew my zipper is I'm going to go ahead and finish off the back seam allowance. That way when I sew it and I press it open from the notch all the way up, it's already finished off for me to do my zipper. So go ahead and finish off the back seam allowance now, and then sew from the notch, from the hemline to the notch, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end using a regular length stitch. Once you get to that notch, whether it's 7-inch or 9-inch, whatever you want it for yours, right? Mine is 9-inch. Start at that notch, and then using a basting stitch, base all the way up to the top. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so this is the front, and I have my back done. All I did was stitch up the center back seam, pressed it to one side, and then just left the top portion where the zipper is going to be open, because I have to attach my waistband before I close out the zipper. Okay, so now that this is the back, this part right here, this is the front. With right sides together, we're going to sew our side seam and pockets. Now, you guys are not new to sewing side seams and pockets unless you have not been following me for a while. So if you have not been following me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you are notified every time I upload a new video. And anytime I have a sew along, you are here with me for that sew along. So go ahead and pin your side seam. Now also pin your pockets as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pin from the top all the way down and the side of my pocket. Make sure you do not stitch your pocket closed. All right, now I did make little dots right here, which you probably cannot see it, but there's one here and there's one here for me to stitch down. So I'm going to stitch from the top using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, stitch from the top to that dot, break my thread, and then come down here to this dot right here and back stitch at the beginning here, and then sew all the way down to the bottom. So go ahead and pin, and then take it to your sewing machine and sew your side seam in your pocket. Now do that on both sides. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached my side seams together and my pockets, I also based the pockets towards the front of my skirt. So this is what it's looking like right now. You also notice that the back, the center back where the zipper is still open. Now before I go ahead and close up my zipper, what I'm going to do is go ahead and flip it over to where the back is facing me or looking up at the table, whichever way you want to call it, right? And what I'm gonna do is go ahead and grab one of my interface waistband. Now both of them should be interfaced. You do not have to interface both of them. I did to stabilize both of my waistbands simply because my fabric is a little thin. So therefore I wanted to make sure that, you know, I have a really nice and stiff waistband. All right, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and attach, making sure that I open out the zipper area. I'm just going to attach it all the way around. All right, and the reason why is simply because your waistband is whatever measurement you did plus a 1/2 inch. So because it is an add-on, there's no notches or anything that you should be, you know, that you should have on your waistband. So just go ahead and pin your waistband all the way around your skirt now. All right, so now that I have my skirt attached to the sides and the pockets, and then I went ahead and based the pockets towards the front of my skirt. So this is what it's looking like right now. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and turn my skirt facing me to where I am looking at the center back. And what I'm going to do is attach the waistband. All right, so I'm gonna open it out like this and attach the waistband. Okay, now for the waistband, I did interface both of the waistbands to, you know, hold and give it good stability. You do not have to. If you have a thicker fabric, this is a thin fabric, so if you have a thick fabric, you do not need to interface both of them, but I highly advise you to interface both of your waistbands. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, open this out. Now if you notice, I did not make any notches in my waistband because really all I'm doing is just attaching it to the top part of the skirt all the way around. So go ahead and attach your waistband to the top portion of your skirt all the way around now. All right, so now that I have my waistband pinned all the way around, if you have excess waistband, that's perfectly fine. You could cut it off at the end if you choose to, or you can pull it, make a couple of snips to where it will give to where you could fit your entire waistband onto your skirt. So you could do that as well. That's completely up to you. Now, remind you that you will not be sewing using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We made the seam allowance a 1/2 inch. So using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and sew all the way around and back stitch at the end. making sure you backstitch both at the beginning and at the end. After you do that, go ahead and press your seam allowance up towards your waistband. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my waistband pinned on, and I sewed it on actually, I trimmed the waistband down and pressed the seam allowance up towards the waistband. Now what you're going to do is go ahead and install your zipper. Now if you do not know, I normally just base my zipper area up. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pin all the way up and then baste it from the notch all the way up to the top. Okay, so make sure you match up your seam allowance. What you do not want is, you know, your seams kind of off. You don't want that. So make sure you are matching up the seam allowance for your zipper. So I'm matched it up and I'm going to pin there, and I'm going to pin along the top portion, making sure your seam allowance is pressed up towards the waistband instead of down towards the skirt. So go ahead and finish pinning your zipper area now. Now that I have my zipper area pinned using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a basting stitch based from the notch all the way up, go ahead and do that now, and then go ahead and install your zipper. We have done zippers on this channel again so many times. If you need a reference to how to do a zipper, I'm going to go ahead and link my Sew What series, the skirt, which was not the skirt, I think it was project number 4 when we did the 2-piece for the top. It's the same method for installing invisible zippers. So I'll go ahead and link that in the description box below, as well as how to do it for a skirt in the description box below. So go ahead and install your zipper now, and we'll come back and finish off the waistband. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I finished off my zipper, I completely basted it and then went ahead and did my permanent stitch on my zipper. So it is looking really good. It zips up really nicely as well. So now the next thing that I'm gonna do is go ahead and finish off my waistband. So grab the other waistband. It looks like this, all right? And what you're going to do is with right sides together. Now, one thing that I want to do, this is completely up to you. I want to make sure that I am pinning the right portion to my waistband like this, right? So when it flips up, I want it to look like this. So I want to make sure that my waistband is pinned all the way around correctly. So I'm going to open it out, make sure I open out my zipper area, and I'm going to pin all the way around my zipper, not my zipper, but my waistband, all right? Making sure that you open out that zipper area. So go ahead and pin all the way around your waistband now. All right, so now that I have my waistband, or I guess you could call it the waistband facing, whatever you want to call it, I have it pinned to my waistband right sides together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning, sew all the way around, and back stitch at the end. Once I'm done sewing that, I'm going to go ahead and use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or maybe 3/4. Get close to the zipper teeth as possible without sewing it on. I'm going to finish off my zipper area on both sides and trim the seam allowance down and press it towards the waistband facing. So you're going to press it up towards the waistband facing and then under stitch. All right. So once again, you're going to stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, trim it down. Once you trim it down, you're going to finish off the zipper area as close to the teeth as possible without sewing on the zipper teeth, and then press your seam allowance up towards the facing, all right? The facing piece. Make sure that you go ahead and press in a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this bottom edge of your facing as well, okay? You could do it now, or you could do it after you sew it on. That's completely up to you how you want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and make a 1/2 inch basting stitch all the way around so I do not forget when I get ready to fold it in for, you know, to enclose my waistband. All right, so go ahead and do all of that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached my waistband facing right sides together, I went ahead and finished off my zipper area. I created a basting stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance and pressed that under. I went ahead and finished off my zipper teeth, of course, and installed my label. Okay, so I did all of that just a few seconds ago. Now, the next thing you want to do is we're going to go ahead and now I'm going to be doing stitch in the ditch. You do not have to, but all you're going to do is make sure that your seam allowance for your skirt is pressed up towards your waistband. Go ahead and you want to take this press edge and go about 1/8 of an inch past that line, but you're going to pin on the right side of your skirt. So I'm just going to pin like that all the way around, making sure it catches that press edge and you are about 1/8 of an inch under that press edge, and you're just going to pin all the way around. All right, so go ahead and pin your waistband to your skirt now. All right, so now that I have it pinned all the way around, just basically stitching in the ditch or a little on your waistband, whichever way you choose to do it. You're just going to stitch in the ditch all the way around to enclose that waistband, and then you just zip it up to make sure that it looks good. The only thing left for you to do is hem. Now, before you hem it, make sure you let your skirt hang on a dress form or on a hanger. You need to have it hanging, not just sitting on the table. No, it needs to be hanging for at least 24 hours before you hem it. Now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and serge it. My skirt has been hanging for a little over 24 hours, but I'm going to let it hang a little bit longer before I hem it and take photos, all right? But once you do that, you are all done with your skirt. Go ahead and move your skirt over to the side so we can start working on our dress.
Let's go. Wait. Hold up, Q. Yeah, feel like I'm at the tippy top of my game, looking down at the rafters. I had to sun these boys, can't leave them bastards. A lot of dudes, just some undercover actors. I don't fall for it.
All right, so let's go ahead and start with the dress now. So you will only need 4 pattern pieces, which is pattern piece 6, 7, 8, and 9. Your dress front, your dress back, your neck binding, and your armhole facing. Now, one thing I will mention about the neck binding and the armhole facing, you do not have to use the binding or the facing for your dress. You can use bias tape. If you do that, you're going to have to just kind of like follow along with what I'm doing, because I am going to be using the neck binding and the armhole, but you would just attach it the same way and just use bias tape instead. You can do that if that is exactly what you want to do for this. All right, the only notion that you will need is a 24-inch invisible zipper for this. Now, I do not have a 24-inch zipper. I have a 22-inch zipper. So what I'm going to do is, where my notch is, I'm just going to go up 3 inches from that 24-inch, or maybe 4 inches from that notch in the back, which I'm going to show you here shortly, and kind of shorten it a little bit just so my zipper will meet where I need it to meet and not be too long, too short. All right, so let's go ahead and cover the fabric cutting layout right quick. You know, you have your right side front, your wrong side front of the pattern, the right side fabric, and the wrong side of your fabric. Just make sure you know what all of those mean. Also take a look at your notions, which is also on the pattern itself on the instructions, so you need to take a look at that. We are doing view B, which is the dress in this tutorial right now. Also, I am using 45-inch fabric, so the cutting layout for view B. Now I am cutting a size 18 for my dress, so I would follow this cutting layout right here, which means that I am cutting with the right side of the fabric together. The wrong side of pattern piece number 6 needs to be facing up on the fabric, which is this one right here, as well as pattern piece number 9, which is my armhole, okay? So make sure you look at that when you're cutting these pieces out. So I am following this layout. I have already cut my pattern piece and my fabric, so I'm gonna go ahead and get straight into the sewing. For this one, you do not need any interfacing whatsoever for this, so you can skip that as well. Also, you need to look at the glossary on what does E-stitch, edge stitch, understitch, slip stitch, stay stitch, top stitch, all the stitches mean, as well as gathering and narrow hem, and how you're going to finish off your seams. I will be using my serger, but you could always use pinking shears, turn it in twice, or use your serger as well if you have it. All seam allowance, unless otherwise indicated, will be 5/8 of an inch seam allowance as well, okay? That you see here on the instructions. Now, you may look at the instructions and notice that I am going out of order. I have a way of doing this just to make it easier on you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this tutorial for view B, which is the dress. So let's go ahead and start with the pattern pieces. So the first pattern piece you will need is pattern piece number 6, which is your front. You should have cut it on the fold of the fabric. Also, make sure you transfer all your notches, your dots, and this fishtail dart that you have right here for view B. Now, you will only transfer this fishtail dart for the dress. You will not transfer this for your top if you are making the top, okay? Which will be in another video. All right, so make sure you also transfer this dot. This is where you will gather at the very top portion of your dress, all right? Now, you will notice that I did make an adjustment to my pattern, and that's simply because one thing you need to get into the habit of is measuring your pattern piece from the size that you plan on cutting all the way to the edge. Mark that. Multiply it by 2 because you are cutting on a fold, so you have 2 sides. Multiply it by 2 and subtract 1.25, which is 5/8 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch for one side, 5/8 of an inch for the other side. When you add 5/8 plus 5/8, which is 10/8, which is essentially 1 and 2/8, which is 1 1/4, which is 1.25. That is what you need to subtract. And then you add the front and the back together to see what is your waist measurement. You do the same thing for the bust, and you do the same thing for the hips. Now, for me, I did have to add a little bit, even though I cut the size 18. For the hips, I did add a 1/2 inch to give me 1 inch. I'm sorry, 1/4 of an inch to give me 1 inch all the way around to where my hips would be a 46.5 instead of just a 45.5. So that's what I did for mine. You do whatever adjustments that you need for yours, okay? So that's pattern piece number 6. You need pattern piece number 7. You need to cut 2, not on the fold of fabric. Also make sure you transfer your dot, your fishtail darts, and any of the notches that you have going on. You will need to transfer the dot. Now, on the back, you have 2 dots. This dot right here is for your zipper, and this dot right here is to take up, to create that slit in the back of your dress, if you want that as well. All right. And then you have pattern piece number 8, which is, like I said, this is your neck binding for both your top as well as your dress. And then you have your armhole binding, which is pattern piece number 9 for both your top and your dress. All right, so that's all the pattern pieces you need. Now that we went over the pattern pieces, let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. So go ahead and grab your front pattern piece. All right, so now that I have my front pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 6, I have already done this, but I'm going to tell you what to do. So the first thing you need to do is gather from dot to dot. Now, the first stitch is done a basting stitch. The first stitch is done at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and the second one is a 1/4 of an inch. The reason why I did that is because I simply do not want to take the seam ripper and rip out basting stitches once I attach it, okay? If I did 5/8 of an inch, you would see it, and I don't want to see basting stitch on the right side of my dress. So that's why I did that. So you need to gather in between from dot to dot, all right? After you gather, the next step you're going to do is your fishtail darts. Now I have done one just to show you right here. So I'm going to show you how to do this one, and you will also do the fishtail darts in the back of your dress as well, which is pattern piece number 7. You have 2 for the front, and then you have 2 in the back, 1 on each back pattern piece, all right? So what I'm going to do is it's essentially darts, but you would start at these 2 dots and sew to this dot, flip it over and do the same thing in the opposite direction, okay? So what you want to do is go ahead and take up your fishtail dart as if you are pinning out your dart, okay? So you pin at that dot, look both front and back to see if it matches up, and you will pin all the way to that dot, those 2 dots that you have right here. So go ahead and pin the dart now. So now that I have it pinned from that dot all the way down, I'm gonna go to my sewing machine, starting at this dot, back, and using a regular length stitch of 2.5, I'm gonna back stitch at this dot and sew all the way down to this dot. However, I am not going to be back stitching at this dot. I'm just gonna pull up thread and then tie it in like 2 or 3 knots. That's what you would do for your darts. Do not back stitch at the end when you are making the darts, okay? Also, once you do that, you're going to flip it over. So now you're looking at it this way, okay? And you'll notice that from this dot to there, you will do the same thing. So you would just go ahead and pin at that dot that you have and pin up the other way, making sure that both lines on the front and the back match up. So now that I have that pinned, then I would also start at that dot, back stitch at this dot, and sew all the way down to this dot. Do not back stitch at this dot, just pull up thread and tie it. Once you do that, you will press your seam to the center, which is the center front of your front piece. Now the back, you will press it to the back where you have your zipper, okay? And I will show you that here shortly. So go ahead and make your fishtail darts now on both your front and on your back. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my gathers done, I have my fishtail darts done in both the front and the back. Now this is the wrong side of my front. If you notice that I press my fishtail darts towards the center, that's the center of my front, instead of pressing them to the side. So make sure you are pressing your fishtail darts towards the center of your front, okay? Now go ahead and move your front out of the way quickly and grab your back pattern pieces. So now with the back pattern pieces, so I'm going to show you my back pattern pieces. I did the same thing. I did my fishtail darts, and then I press the fishtail darts towards the back. I also finished off my center back where my zipper area is going to be, like I told you to go ahead and do. Now what we're going to do next is go ahead and start prepping our zipper area for our back. So with right sides together, you're going to sew up your zipper area, all right? So now remember me talking about the dots, and I actually went up 4 inches simply because my zipper is not 24 inches. My zipper is 22 inches. So I had to go up to make it roughly about 18 inches instead of 22 inches, okay? So my zipper is really about 20 to 22 inches. So the first thing you want to do is pin at that notch, and then you want to pin all the way up to the top portion of your center back, or your back pattern pieces. So go ahead and pin your center back now. All right, so now that I have it pinned from the entire center back, what you're going to do, you have a couple of options. It all depends on if you want that slit in the back or not. So if you do not want the slit in the back, what you're going to do is using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, and sew all the way to this notch. Once you get to this notch, this is using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, back stitch at the beginning, and then back stitch at this notch. Once you get to the notch, switch to a basting stitch, still using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Start from this notch. You do not have to back stitch. Start at this notch and then sew all the way up to the top, and do not back stitch at the end, okay? So that's what you're gonna do, and then press your seams open and get ready to install your zipper. Now, we have done zippers so many times on this channel, so I'm not going to walk you through how to do the zipper. You should know how to do that by now. If you do not know how to install a zipper, I will go ahead and put in a quick link on how to install your zipper right here as well, all right? That you could click on in the description box below. That will take you to how to install an invisible zipper, okay? All right, so also, if you want that slit, now if you want that slit in the back, what you're going to do is you're gonna start at the hem, back stitch at the beginning using a regular length stitch, back stitch at the beginning, and you have two options. Now there's 2 dots on mine, but the second dot is for view C, so I don't want that dot. What you can do, you have 2 options. Like I said, it depends on how much of a slit you want. I want a small slit, so I'm going to start at the hem and come up to this dot, back stitch at the beginning, and then sew up to this notch right here. Now I'm not going to back stitch at the beginning and sew up to this notch. I'm just going to start at this notch, back stitch at this notch, and then sew all the way to this notch. So this is a dot right here where I have 2 pins. I'm going to start there, back stitch there, sew all the way up to the notch, back stitch at the notch, switch to a basting stitch, and then sew all the way up. Once I do that, I'm going to press my entire top portion where the zipper is going to be open, okay? And also, once I do that, I'm going to also make sure that I press from the dot all the way to the hem open as well. Once I press that open, you're going to create what is called a narrow hem. So you're going to press into that 5/8 of an inch and then fold it in and make that square, which I'm going to show you here shortly because I'm actually doing the slit version instead of the non-slit version, okay? So go ahead and stitch your center back however way you want to do it now. All right, so now that I have the center back attached, the zipper area, I pressed it open. I also did my slit in the back. So basically I pressed it open, and because my seams are already serged on the back, I did not do the narrow hem process. I just pressed it and then stitched at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance just to hold it together for my zipper. So now, I'm sorry, for my slit. All right, so if you are doing a slit, all you need to do is on the right side, you're just going to stitch from the hem all the way up until you get close to this dot. With your needle down, lift your presser foot, turn it this direction towards you, and then you're going to stitch across. And then once you get towards that end of this portion right here, you're going to keep the needle down, turn it again, pivoting, and then sew from that section all the way down, okay? And you will create a nice lovely slit, all right? Now, after you do that, the only thing you need to do, the next thing you need to do really, is go ahead and do your zipper. So go ahead and pull out your zipper. Now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and stabilize my zipper area from the top all the way down to that notch with just some interfacing. I'm just going to put some interfacing there, and then I'm going to go ahead and install my zipper. So go ahead and do your zipper. Once you do that, we'll come back and we will continue with the next steps. So go ahead and do your zipper now. All right, so now that I went ahead and finished off my zipper area, it's looking good. I can zip it up and down with no problem. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and attach the front to the back at the shoulders and the side seam. So this is the back of my dress with the zipper. It's facing right sides up. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our front and have it with the right sides together. We're going to pin at our shoulders and then pin at the side seam. So I'm going to go ahead and zip my dress all the way up, and then pin my front to the back at shoulders. So go ahead and grab your pin and pin at that notch that you have in your shoulders, and then pin all the way across. Do that on both sides. So go ahead and pin your shoulder seams together now. Alright, so now that I have my shoulders pinned, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew across both shoulder seams. After you do that, go ahead and sew your side seam the same way. Now, I did not pin it, but all you have to do is just pin your side seams together and sew your side seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once again, you're going to use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch. You're going to sew across your shoulder seam and then finish them off, and then sew your side seam as well and finish them off as well. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the shoulder seams right here, shoulder seams, and the side seams sewn, so I'm going to turn this wrong side out so you can see this. So I have my shoulder seams as well as my side seams sewn using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I went ahead and pressed it towards the back once I finished off my seam allowance with my serger. So that's what we're looking at right now, or what we're looking like. So now what I need you to do is go ahead, I'm just going to turn mine right side out again and put my dress off to the side. So go ahead and put your dress off to the side and grab pattern piece number 8, which is your neck binding. So you should have cut one piece of pattern piece number 8, which is your neck binding, and what you're going to do is press up 5/8 of an inch. Now I just created a basting stitch, pressed up 5/8 of an inch, and after you do that, you're just going to trim it down to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which I have already done. All right. So now what you're going to do is go ahead and grab your dress, and we're going to pin our neck binding onto our dress with right sides together. All right. So let me go ahead and open up my dress, and then what I'm going to do is go ahead. Now I'm going to start on this side and pin my neckband all the way around. So I'm just going to start right there, making sure you open out the zipper area. All right, and keep that bottom edge pressed up. Every time you see a dot, that dot matches up with the shoulder seam, so you want to pin there at the shoulder seam. And then if you need to, pin in between if you need to as well. And then we're just going to pin all the way around, making sure that you pull up the gathers if you need to pull up the gathers, okay? So I'm going to match all of my dots and my notches first and then pull up the gathers. So go ahead and pin all the way around your neck area now. All right, so now that I have my neck binding pinned all the way across my dress at the neck edge, I also pulled up the gathers in order for the gathers to be gathered together in between the dots. So you have a dot on your neck binding, make sure it matches up with the dot on your dress. Now, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and then trim your seam allowance down and press it towards your neck binding, okay? So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the neck binding attached to my neck at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, what I'm going to do is go ahead and trim it down and also cut off this excess zipper as well. So I'm just going to trim it all the way down to about 3/8 of an inch without going through my stitching. So go ahead and trim down the neck area now. Now that I have the neck area trimmed down, what you're going to do is go ahead and press your seam allowance towards your neck binding and then encase it in basically what I'm going to do is encase, make sure that I press that up, and then I'm going to encase it, making sure that I fold in my neck binding and catch it, and then stitch on the right side and encase it. Now I'm going to be stitching at about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way along my neck edge once I press this seam allowance towards the neck binding. All right, so go ahead and do that now so we could go ahead and finish off with our armhole facing. Go ahead and do your neck binding now. One thing I want to mention before I sew my neck binding is you need to turn in 3/8 of an inch at the very end of both sides of your binding right here like this, and then you want to fold it down. That way you have a clean finish when you zip up your zipper, okay? So it'll look like this, okay? So you want to do that too, and then finish your neck area and sew it all the way around. All right, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my neck binding completely done, I also went ahead and pressed up the hem. The hem allowance is 1 1/4, so I went ahead and pressed the hem up, basically serged all the way around. Made a basting stitch at 1 1/4, pressed it up, and then stitched on the right side of the fabric. Now you can do like a narrow hem there if you choose. I did not want to. I wanted it the way that I have it, so that's why I did that there. So the only thing left for you to do is your armhole, okay? So I'm going to turn it right side out so you can see this really good. And I did one side of the armhole. You're going to do the other side. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through a little bit of how to do it, because it's pretty much the same thing as your neck binding, okay? So go ahead and put your dress off to the side and grab your armhole, which is pattern piece number 9. And then with right sides together, you're going to attach at the ends, okay? So just fold it right side together, attach at the end, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew your seams together. Once you do that, it's going to look like this, and you're going to press your seams open. After pressing your seams open with wrong sides together, you're going to press your armhole facing all the way around, okay? So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my armhole facing pressed all the way around with the wrong sides together, go ahead and grab your dress, and you're going to pin the armhole facing to your dress. Now I'm going to start at the underarm seam, and what you're going to do is with right sides together, you're going to pin, making sure that that seam allowance for your dress is pressed towards the back portion of your dress, okay, where your zipper is. So I'm going to make sure that I attach the armhole facing to that seam line, and then you want to pin. So go ahead and grab your pins, and you want to pin there, and then you have a dot, okay, which is right here. You want to match that dot to the shoulder seams, okay? So just make sure you completely maneuver it to where that large dot is matching up to your shoulder seams, okay? Will match up to your shoulder seams, so make sure also that the shoulder seam is pressed towards the back of your dress, and you want to make that dot, match that dot to this shoulder seam, and then you're going to pin all the way around. So go ahead and pin the rest of your armhole facing all the way around, making sure you match up the notches as well. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my armhole facing pinned to my armhole, right sides together, I'm gonna start at my underarm seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, back stitch at the beginning, and sew all the way around and back stitch at the end. Once you do that, you're going to do like you did for your neck binding. You're going to trim it down, press the seam allowance towards the armhole facing, and then flip it inside, press it to the inside, and then sew all the way around, top stitching on your armhole. And it'll look just like this, okay? So it'll look clean on the inside and on the outside. Once you do that, you are all finished with your dress. go ahead and move this off to the side so we can start working on the top. Now, one thing I want to mention for the top is it's pretty much the exact same thing as the dress outside of the fishtail darts. So I will walk you through the first portion of it, and then you can follow along with the dress in order to construct the top. So let's go ahead and move this off to the side and start working on the top now.
Yeah. Ooh, let's go. Wait. Hold up, Q. Yeah. Feel like I'm at the tippy top of my game, looking down at the rafters. I had to sun these boys, can't leave them bastards. A lot of dudes, just some undercover actors. I don't fall for it, I'm privy to all your tactics. Yeah, so try again, this time take a vitamin. Yeah, invite them in, welcome to the Lion's Den.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the top, which is view C on Butterick 6718 in this whole collection. So we are doing the top, but the top is essentially the same thing as the dress without the fishtail darts, okay? So I'm not gonna walk you through all of it, but I will walk you through majority of it simply because I am doing a hack for the top. So the only pieces that I am using is 6, 7, and 8, which is your front, your back, and your neck binding. Now, because I am adding sleeves to this top, I will not be needing pattern piece number 9, which is your armhole facing, okay? Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to is the top portion, which it starts at step 10. So right here on step number 10, you're going to do exactly what you did for the dress, which is gather the neck edge of the front between the small dots. After you do that, you're going to do the invisible zipper, which is in the back of your top. After you do that, you're going to stitch the shoulder seams and your side seams and then attach the neck binding, and then you'll be done. If you're doing the arm binding, you would do exactly the exact same thing that I did for the dress. So you could rewind it back or go back and see exactly what I did for the dress. Now for this sew along, what I'm going to be showing you, I'm not going to be showing you how to do the gathers, the zipper area, or necessarily attaching it right sides together, the shoulders to the side. But however, what I am going to show you, I'm going to skip the first couple of sections, portions of it, like the gathers, doing the invisible zipper in the back, and we're going to start right at the sleeves, okay? And then I'm going to attach it right sides together, the shoulder to the side seam, and then do the neck binding. And then hemming and you're all done. So let's go ahead and get right on into it for the top. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 1, just to kind of recap quickly. All right, so this is my pattern piece, not pattern piece number 1, pattern piece number 6, which is your front of your top. Now I have marked mine, what side is the wrong side. So this is the wrong side. This is the right side. So all you're going to do is like you did for the dress, you're just going to gather in between the 2 dots for your front. After you do that, go ahead and grab pattern piece number 7, which is your back. You're going to do exactly the same thing like you did for your dress. What you're going to do is with right sides together. Now make sure that for pattern piece number 7, the back, you go ahead and search the center back seam. After you do that, right sides together, you're going to attach the center back and install your zipper, okay? So you're going to do all of that. Now, after you do that, the next thing we're going to do is with right sides together, we're going to pin our front to the back at the shoulders only. I am not going to be pinning the sides simply because I'm going to insert my sleeves doing the flat method. Now make sure, because mine is a solid color, I want to make sure that I have the front to the back right sides together. So because I know that this is the wrong side, I know that this side is my right side, and I'm going to pin it together at the shoulders. So go ahead, match up your notches and your dots and pin at the shoulders. Go ahead and do that now. Now that I have the shoulders pinned using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end and sew across both shoulders. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my shoulder seams sewn together, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and finished off, the next thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and insert the sleeves using the flat method. All right, so go ahead and put your top aside for just a second, and I'm going to show you the sleeves. Now I am using the sleeves from New Look 6692. I have done this dress. It's actually a dress, and I'm going to show you the pattern. So it's this pattern right here. I know you guys are waiting for me to show you guys how to do the top portion of this. It is coming together. Just stay locked to the channel so you can see how I put the bodice together. I'm not going to put the skirt together, but I will show you how to do the bodice for this dress. So I am using the sleeves from this pattern in order to create this top, okay? So now what I did was I went ahead and cut out 2 sleeves. Now this is what I normally do. I'm gonna move one out off to the side. So starting at the single notch, I back stitch using a basting stitch. I back stitch at the single notch and then sew all the way over to the double notch and just pull up thread for my gathering stitches. I do the first one at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and the second one at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then that way when I sew 5/8, I do not have to pull up gathering stitches, okay? Or remove gathering stitches, I should say. After I created my gathering stitches along the sleeve cap, I went ahead and did a basting stitch at the very bottom for the hem. This is the hem, but it's gonna have elastic in it. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I did a basting stitch, pressed to that 5/8, and then pressed up again. Now, this one is already stitched in place, so I'm gonna show you on the other one. So this is the wrong side. So what I'm going to do for this one is go ahead and press the raw edge to that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance line and then press in again, okay? And then I'm going to stitch on the right side at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to enclose this raw edge, okay? Once I do that, I'm going to cut my elastic. You have an elastic guide. Cut your elastic and sift your elastic all the way through, making sure you tack your elastic down at the ends. Now, one thing I don't do is, with right sides together, then go ahead and go all the way around the elastic, and then the elastic gets twisted and all that good stuff. So what I do is I attach my elastics to the end and then sew with right sides together, okay? And attach it, okay? Now, because I'm doing the flat method, after I do that, I will install my sleeves into my top. So let's go ahead, go to your pressing table, go ahead and do this hem and the gathering stitches so we could go ahead and install the sleeve. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and insert the elastic at the hem portion of my sleeve, I went ahead and gathered. Go ahead and grab your sleeve, or your top, I'm sorry. And what we're going to do is go ahead and do the flat method and insert our sleeves. Now, I have done the flat method so many times on this channel, so if you are uncertain on how I do the flat method, I will also put a link to the puff sleeve blouse, which is New Look 6698, in the description box below, and then also you could go to that video and see how I do my flat method for the sleeves. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and match up the notch. I have a single notch here, so that single notch on my sleeve match up to the single notch on my top. Now the single notch indicate that it's the front of the top, so you want to pin there. I'm also going to pin at the end. And then I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to pin the double notch that you see there. There's a double notch on your sleeve as well as on the back portion of your top. You want to pin there, pin at the end. And then you're just going to basically pin along the armscye or the armhole area of your top, making sure that if it's too big, you can always take in some gathers or let it out. So go ahead and pin your sleeve to your armhole now. Alright, so now that I have the sleeve pinned onto the armscye area of my top using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew my sleeve into my armhole. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and finish off the sleeve. So go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now that I have the sleeves installed into my armscye area or my arm area of my top, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put right sides together. Then that way I could go ahead and sew my side seam and finish off my sleeve as well. So with right sides together, I'm going to pin from the top, from the hem, all the way up to the sleeve. So go ahead and pin now. So now that I have my side seam pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end and sew your side seam in place. Once you do that, go ahead and finish off your sleeve. So go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now that I have my sleeve sewn in, my side seam is sewn as well. The only thing that's left for you to do is your neck binding. So I'm going to open up my zipper, and I'm not going to show you how to do this because you could see this from the dress. It's the same thing. So basically, I'm going to move my top over to the side, my neck binding right here, and all you're going to do is on the portion that's the unnotched edge, you're going to press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Use a basting stitch, press it up. After you press it up, you're going to trim it down to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you're going to open it out and pin all the way around. Okay, once you pin all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, you're just going to sew all the way around, and you're going to do the exact same thing that you did with the dress for the neck binding. If you did not see that, go back to the dress for Butterick 6718 and then go ahead and attach your neck binding like I did for the dress. All right, once you do that, the only thing that's left for you to do is go ahead and stitch up your hem. Now for the top, the hem allowance is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is what I did for my hem. And once you sew in your hem, you are all done with your top.
Yeah. Ooh, let's go. Wait. Hold on, Q. Yeah. Feel like I'm at the tippy top of my game, looking down at the rack.
All right, so there you have it. That is the complete sew along for the skirt, the top, and the dress. I hope you liked this video. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So I'll catch you in the next video, and as always, keep sewing.